Today's episode is brought to you by Textilia. Textilia is the online sewing community you've been waiting for, built for all types of sewists, including garment makers, quilters, and textile artists, as well as business owners. Plan and document your projects, log your stash, search the community-managed database of patterns and fabrics, and connect with other members and businesses all in one easy-to-use website. Join today at textilia.com. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 72 of the Walshing Apps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today, we're talking about natural dyeing with my guest, Kristine Vejar. Kristine is a natural dyer and teacher. She's the founder of A Verb for Keeping Warm, a natural dyeing studio, yarn, and fabric shop located in Oakland, California. Her work is a culmination of knitting and sewing lessons learned from her grandmother, her time spent with nomadic embroiderers in the Great Rann of Kutch, India, and her life natural dyeing in California. Her first book, The Modern Natural Dyer, was released in October of 2015 and was published by Abrams. And Kristine Vejar, I'm really excited to talk to you. Welcome.
Hi, Abby.
Hi. So I want to get started by talking a little bit about your dye studio and shop, A Verb for Keeping Warm. I've heard about it for many years. I know people who've been there. I haven't been myself. But I've heard it described as one of the best yarn, fiber, fabric stores known to mankind. And tell us a little bit about that space. What is it like? Like, do you get a lot of foot traffic? Where are you?
We're right on the border of Oakland and Berkeley, and our block was vacant for a very, very long time. And a coffee shop moved in on the corner, and I'd been looking at this building for a long time, really intrigued by it, loved the architecture of it. And when that coffee shop went in, I kind of felt like, okay, like my customers are going to love having this coffee shop. And I can envision them taking classes and spending time at Verb and having a place to eat and drink. And the person who opened it was really community oriented as well. So kind of conducive to the way that I envisioned my business. So once he opened that, which is called Actual Cafe, then I started talking with the landlord and the real estate agent in order to move into my space. So we do get foot traffic for sure, and we continue to get more foot traffic, but definitely a big part of my business is based kind of in an online sense, and we have a lot of people who visit from all over the world and kind of make the trek to A Verb for Keeping Warm, like from San Francisco, for instance, which I'm always extremely grateful that they've taken the time to come all that way. And yeah, and then we have people just in the Bay Area also that come from all over to come and take classes and what have you. We have a really big Sacramento contingent. Sacramento is about an hour and a half away. So yeah, people come from all over.
Yeah, so it's become basically like a destination for a lot of people. I know it would be for me if I was ever traveling in that area. That's wonderful. So where did the name come from? I think you have perhaps one of the most unusual names for a store like this, or a shop like this. So where did that name come from? How did that occur to you?
Yeah, so there's this archaeologist named Elizabeth Wayland Barber, and she's written a few books. One of them is called Women's Work. And the book, the premise of it is that, well, what she does is she goes around the world and she looks at the oldest textile fragments that we have today. And she tries to ascertain who made them, how they were made. And so part of that is going and working with linguists and looking at dead languages. And there's a dead language that is very close to Estonian. And in that language, there was a verb for keeping warm. And I like to think about how, kind of the pillars of humanity would be something like shelter, clothing, and food. And that at that time it was so important and such a huge part of someone's life to keep warm that they would have this verb, and that we no longer kind of have that verb. So thinking about how we can create conversations, bringing textiles kind of back into the forefront is something really intrinsic and important to us as humans.
Wow, that is a great story. I love that. That's a really good story. So tell us about the store itself. I know that you have an indoor classroom and an outdoor classroom and a dye garden, and that you bring teachers in from all over. So I would love to hear a little bit about kind of the structure of the store inside.
You walk into the space and it's 1,700 square feet and it's very open. And half of the space is dedicated to our indoor natural dye studio and half of it's dedicated to the retail space and the classroom. And then if you keep walking straight, then you go to kind of it's a backyard, it's a patio, but it's 2 levels. And we've built in an educational dye garden. That's also where our outdoor classroom is, as well as our outdoor dye studio. Yeah, so I'm pretty dedicated to experiential learning. Love the idea that, you read and you research, but then you go and you practice what you have read and you've researched so you can really understand the process. So when you go to write about it, it's something very familiar to you. And that was a lot of the basis of my work when I lived in India. So education at Verb, I take pretty seriously, and I think it's a really important component, especially because I kind of have it as my mission to try to teach as many people to knit and sew as possible. So even if you don't end up maybe a knitter or a sewer, you have a sense in your body what it takes to create things, and that there are people around the world making things for us, and that maybe we can have a connection to them physically as to the labor put into those items.
Wow, that's a wonderful mission and a great way to guide your decision making as to what you teach and how you teach it. I think that's terrific. So let's talk a little bit about that time you spent in India, because I know you were there twice. You were there once in college and then once after college on a Fulbright. And those 2 experiences seem to have been really formative for you as far as your relationship to studying textiles and commitment to textiles. So tell us a little bit about both of those trips.
Yeah, I went to India as an undergraduate to study art and architecture. And I got there and there are just textiles everywhere, everything from where people would be walking out a warp for weaving on the street and dyeing, and to people who would make textiles for themselves personally, like in the form of embroidery and applique. And I'd never really thought it was possible to study textiles in academia. It had never occurred to me. I grew up in Minnesota and visiting my grandma in rural Illinois, where she spent so much time with her friends quilting and knitting and sewing, and I was raised around that and learned within that auspice. So it was kind of like something you did at home, and then you maybe went to Joann's and you got some fabric and you sewed it into something. I'd never thought about, how is this fabric made? Who makes this fabric? And all of those processes a little bit deeper. So I began looking around, and my teachers in my program really were enthusiastic about that, and they really promoted it and supported that I look closer at this. So there was a group of nomadic herders who had this beautiful, intricate, embroidered, mainly blouses, and they always wore a headscarf and at the ends of their headscarves. And they were very striking looking, and I was curious about their process and what these things meant to them. And so I began speaking with them about their work and came to understand that all of those embroidered kind of things on their clothing were actually symbols and motifs that all had names. And I began to be able to see those motifs and symbols within the entire kind of embroidered fabric. And 2 things kind of happened. And one was, to kind of look at, after hearing about the different material changes and motif shifts, and I should say that probably the closest community that we would have immediate understanding of in our culture would be Amish people. So this very kind of, very distinct style of making something, and that when you're in that community, you don't make things kind of outside of that style. You stay within that style. So wanting to just understand have things evolved over time? How have motifs changed? How have materials changed? How have the colors changed? And who was able to institute that change within the community? And I started kind of noticing and thinking about this idea that women, non-literate women, were able to record their history in the face of a textile. And that was very interesting to me. And that also textiles, which, is kind of, I think, what fashion intended originally to be, which is to communicate kind of who you are, what's important to you, where you find strength. So for instance, like the Rabari would have embroidered a symbol of an elephant on their clothing. And an elephant, even though they didn't have elephants, was something of royalty. So to kind of hold yourself in this kind of regal stature and that kind of thing. And slowly over time, they've been able to come together and buy or, purchase enough land to just build like a single house. So they might go out for like a week or 2 weeks at a time, but they would come back to this house where they would kind of ultimately keep their textiles, kind of maybe where the children would stay. And so the elephant over time evolved into a cupboard. And that became something that was very, regal and amazing to have.
And so that was like a shift from being a really nomadic culture to being a culture that had sort of a domestic home.
Yes. And that both things are very meaningful, right? Like astute.
And so you're reading this history through really women's stitching.
Yes.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah. So you were just totally, it sounds like, just fascinated and driven to learn about fabric and textiles this way. And did you go back again? And was that when you sort of also started thinking about dyeing fabric and natural dyeing?
Yes. Yeah. So where the Rabari live in the Great Run of Kutch is this kind of hotbed of just different textile techniques and processes. It's absolutely amazing. And people have been doing them for, thousands and thousands of years. So I went back, to work with the Rabari. That's the name of the nomads further. But I also kind of in my mind knew about this natural dyeing community and was very fascinated about natural dyeing. And I had worked at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. between my 2 trips. And I would spend my lunchtime up in their library that had all of these amazing textile books, a lot of them, out of print and what have you. And every time I would read about natural dyeing, I would never be able to understand what they were talking about. I couldn't understand the vocabulary, and it was kind of one of the only things that I would read about that I really couldn't wrap my head around. So I really wanted to be able to see the practice in process. And so when I went back to India, as kind of, I had a few different side research projects going on, and the dyeing was definitely one of them. And one of the things, in India, processes like natural dyeing, for instance, they've been going on for so long that they just keep building their dye baths on top of one another, right? So it's very hard to see the beginning of a process.
Right. A dye bath is, I kind of think of it similarly to like a sourdough starter or something like that, where it's like this living thing and you just kind of keep feeding it and it keeps going. And so it's not like, well, how did you make that?
Yes, exactly. And I would try asking, and the whole concept was even like, what do you mean? Like, how did it start,
Everyone has a bath. Like, what are you talking about? Interesting.
You don't have these things in your country that you can just go be part of? So anyway, I did as much research as I could. And then I needed to come back to the United States because, my grant was coming to an end, and I didn't necessarily want to come home. I really loved India, but it was time to come home. And so when I got back to the United States, I ended up finding a woman who taught me in a linear fashion about natural dyes.
I see.
In English, which was helpful.
Right. And I'm curious as to, was there ever a time in the United States where people did do this? In other words, is this part of U.S. history in some way where we had these dye baths and everybody did this and then it was sort of completely lost? And so now it's about like re-educating and relearning? Or was that just really never part of American history? Do you know?
Yeah, well, until 1857, all color was natural. So at that time, German scientists were able to synthesize color and could create color on demand. So definitely natural dyeing was part of the process and, U.S. history, textiles. And there are people who do reenactments, which I haven't looked too closely at, but I know that they still practice natural dyeing, and that if you do a Google search, you can easily come across them discussing how they're doing natural dyeing just like they did in 1800 or whatever.
Got it. Okay. There was a part of American culture that knew that held this information.
Yes.
Like it was just sort of lost because, although maybe there was a resurgence in the 70s.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a lot of people that do come up to me and tell me that they did natural dyeing in the 70s.
And
I live in California, but
Right. They did natural dyeing in the 70s in California. And what do people often kind of assume? I mean, I'm sure you meet people who just don't know anything about your shop, don't know anything about your history. You might be out somewhere and you explain that you're a natural dyer. And what do people automatically assume about natural dyeing that maybe is or isn't true?
Oh, okay. The two biggest things, it's toxic and it's not light fast.
It's toxic. That's interesting. They think it's toxic versus like a RIT dye. They don't think that's toxic, but they think like dyeing with, madder is toxic.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's rooted in mordants, which is, so the natural dyeing process, very briefly, is you first pre-wash, the material you want to dye, and then you add a mordant, which is a binder. And that's done, you get a bucket of water, a pot of water, and you heat it up with the cloth you want to dye, and you add something. And in our case, we add aluminum potassium sulfate, which is a pickling agent. It's a food grade pickling agent. And then what happens is then you go to the dye bath and you add the color. And the color is actually attaching to this binder, the mordant, and the mordant is attached to the fiber. So that mordant can be different things. And in the past, it was. So kind of 5 mordants that you hear tossed around are aluminum potassium sulfate, iron, copper, chrome, and tin. So chrome, tin, and copper, I would never go near, but people have used it and reenactment people use it. So I think that people automatically, I don't know, there's a pretty big, though, kind of thing put out that natural dyeing is toxic. And I just need to say that it doesn't have to be, and it isn't in most cases. I mean, I don't even know if 0.5% of people in the United States even use something like tin or whatever. I don't think anyone uses chrome. I have no idea why you would.
Okay, so there's a good deal of chemistry involved here, of sort of understanding the chemistry of how these work.
Yeah, it's funny, I went to a high school that didn't require me to take chemistry. I took like botany, and it's interesting as an adult to have had no chemistry background to do what I'm doing. And I have to say, I've always been told I wasn't a science and math person, which, and I use science and math all the time, and I feel a little proud of myself.
You should. It's complex, and the math side of both, knitting, of dyeing, but also of knitting and sewing. There's some intense math in there as well.
Yeah, and I want to just say to everyone out there that, like, you don't have to have any kind of science background or math background to do what I'm doing, and you also could feel very proud of yourself for, doing these things. And I've tried to make it as easy as possible and tried to keep a lot of the chemistry and math kind of behind the scenes. I've taken a big note from cookbooks with my book, in the sense that in cooking, you also practice a lot of math and a lot of chemistry, but you don't know you're doing it.
Yeah, and your book, so we should say the name of your book is The Modern Natural Dyer. It's a comprehensive guide to dyeing silk, wool, linen, and cotton at home. And it's just beautiful. And it's a Melanie Falick book, and I love her books. And but you have described this book as sort of your intention behind it as being like a cookbook versus being kind of like a textbook, of which I know there are many, natural dyeing textbooks. So what is the difference that you see there between those two types of books, and why a cookbook type for you?
Oh, a couple of reasons. So one reason is, working with the clients at Verb every day, I see how excited people get about projects, right? They love yarn, and there are definitely people who just fall in love with a skein of yarn and are going to take it home. But then there's projects. You fall in love with a sweater or a scarf or a dress or something like this, right? And you end up learning how to insert a zipper or make a sweater that you didn't think maybe that you would ever want to do or learn to do, because you were so inspired by the end product. And so I'd taken a big note from that. And then also just from being part personally of kind of the cooking revolution in the United States, growing up in the suburbs where when I was little, canned vegetables or whatever, and then having all these kind of cooking shows and cookbooks come out and watching my mom and then me cook food, learn about, your food and where it comes from, and spending time and having that be a source of joy and play. And that I think, again, if you asked most people, like kind of straight up, do you want to learn how to make a pie crust? You'd be like, well, that kind of sounds a little daunting or laborious or whatever. But if you see this beautiful pie that Ina Garten has made, and you've made other things of hers, you trust her cooking, you're like, okay, maybe I'll try to make a pie crust. I'll make my own pie from scratch. So anyway, I really kind of looked at those two things and thought, I really want projects to be in my book, and that most natural dyeing books don't include projects. And that I think that that's a real kind of disconnect for some people. That perhaps they'd be able to look at these projects and maybe even be an armchair dyer. So maybe you don't want to dye your own materials, you're not there yet, but you love textiles, you love knitting, you love sewing, and you just want to understand more about the materials you're using, and that you might then come to purchasing naturally dyed materials from a different kind of knowledge point. And that maybe in the future you would try actually going a step further and dyeing your own materials.
And now a word from our sponsor, Textilia.
My name's Ariane Ketchatorians, and my partner Bruno and I have started a website called Textilia, and it's the mythical Ravelry of sewing. I'm a longtime Ravelry member, and I think one of the most important things, and you can really see in Ravelry that we've been careful to study and put into Textilia, is how much thought there's been put into the way that the content is structured. So when people are posting sewing projects, they can link it to the company and the pattern and the fabric they used, and everything is interconnected all the time. And then the other side of it is obviously the community aspect. So we've been working to build a community who's really dedicated to Textilia, and also build more and more tools for them to connect with each other, so you can follow your friends and keep up on what projects they're working on, comment on their projects. We've got forums, and we're going to be adding a bunch more community building tools as time goes on. It's one thing that's great about social media is that there's so much easy on-the-fly documentation of what we're working on. And it's so easy to connect with people, but we lose a little bit of something in that when we post projects they kind of have this impermanence. And so Textilia is a great way to both get inspired, connect with your community, and then also document what you're working on and plan it in a way that you can really preserve it and come back to it and remember what you did and find it easily. And the stuff that you're working on doesn't just kind of disappear into the ether after a couple of weeks. It's really like building up a record of all of the things that you've sewn. Even though Google is obviously a great search engine, there's just not sewing specific filters on Google. I'm Ariane from Textilia, and you can join today at textilia.com. Also, be sure to sign up for our newsletter, because we've been including some special information about companies on our site, such as sale codes that are exclusive to the members of Textilia. So it's a great resource for finding out about new patterns and also getting some special features from businesses.
Thank you so much, Textilia. And now back to my chat with Kristine. Mm-hmm. And you see natural dyeing as like another way of enjoying nature, like how we garden or we go on a hike. And that wearing clothing that's been natural dyed, whether you dye it yourself or you're purchasing clothing that's been dyed naturally by somebody else, is like a way to kind of be with nature. And I just think that that's really an interesting perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fun. Today, I'm doing in April, Alabama Channon, Natalie Channon, has these wonderful, they're also Melanie Falick Books, 4 or 5 books rooted in her sewing style. And the two of us are coming together for the month of April, and we're kind of doing Alabama Channon, Modern Natural Dyer mashup. And I printed for her last summer when she came to visit this piece of fabric with flowers from our dye garden at Verb as kind of a memory of like, you were here and here's a piece of California to bring home with you. And then she's now gone and made that into a tunic and put it on her blog, so it's this kind of fun exchange. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just feel like it's a way to capture a moment. It's a way to capture the environment around you. It's something you can keep building on. Once something's mordanted once, you can keep dyeing it. You don't have to mord it and then dye it every time. So you could add more layers to a piece of fabric or to a skein of yarn or to an already made dress or quilt. I think it's a nice story.
Yeah, and they're reflective of the environment where they were made, and it's almost like a souvenir in that way, right? Because there's all of these unpredictable factors, or maybe they're sort of predictable, but they're hard to sort of make completely consistent from one, experience to another, like where the plant was grown exactly. And, like if you're using an extract, how it went through the extraction process, like how that went, and then where it was dyed. Like there's all these different pieces that make it, have it a unique quality that maybe wouldn't be the same if you tried it a year later or a few months later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's alive, so we'll get, one of the challenges of my job can be that, because we do have our own line of naturally dyed yarn and fabric, is that, we'll get a batch of, let's say, madder in, and a year later, the crop has changed. And so now we're dyeing and we're not getting the same color that we were getting a year before. And that color has a colorway attached to it. It's on the website. So we then go and we adapt our recipes to the new dye batch.
Right. And that is hard because you have your own fabrics and your own yarns, and you work with designers, and it has to be consistent, but it's sort of inherently an inconsistent process. And so it can't look different later on. Right. Yeah. And then also, what about like price fluctuations as far as like when that crop is not as good, right? Is the price of that dye, of that extract is gonna be elevated.
Yep, there's a market rate for natural dyes. They're constantly changing, and we hired a QuickBooks point of sale expert who came in. And we map and track all of those changes behind the scenes, so we understand, the cost fluctuations for what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's something that maybe people don't understand or just overlook, like the complexity of running a business that's based on this sort of fluctuating commodity,
Yes.
Yeah. For sure. And you dye fabrics as well. Will you tell us a little bit about the fabrics that you carry?
Yeah, we carry all sorts of different fabric, just like we do with yarn. So we have the Verb fabric and yarn, but then we also carry, like in the yarn section, Quince and Company and Brooklyn Tweed. We tend to try to carry and support companies who are doing the processes as much as possible in the United States. And then on the fabric side, we have beautiful Merchant and Mills linens, and we have a line of fabric from India that's made of organic cotton that's hand spun and hand woven. And kind of we try to, again, source out places where we can understand who's making the fabric and see the processes that they're using. And so in our own kind of fabric dyeing, we usually dye linen or linen cotton blends, organic cotton, and we have some indigo dyed fabric in this shop right now.
And when customers come into the shop, I'm just wondering, I think you're a maker. You do so many kinds of things. You equally sew and knit, which I think is even unusual in and of itself. Obviously, you're a dyer. You do embroidery, quilting, and you've tried all of these other things too, like weaving, reeling silk, and all kinds of things, and cooking and gardening. I mean, you really are the definition of kind of a maker. You do all of that stuff. And I just wonder, when people come into the shop, you probably really love kind of the more the complexity of it all, and sort of making each thing unique and different and all of that kind of thing. And I just wonder, when people come in and they maybe are seeking something very simple, like if there's ever like a gap there between your desire to explore and understand and the average consumer's desire to escape from their everyday life by doing something easy.
Oh my goodness, this is the story of my life. Yeah, so we definitely, things have changed. They've evolved, which is good. We still, though, definitely, a knitter comes in, they only want to see yarn. Like the fact that we have fabric, is a little maybe insulting. Like that could all be yarn. Or a fabric person comes in and they just wish it was all fabric. And I say it's 50-50, and the whole idea is you come to buy fabric to make a dress and yarn to make a sweater. So yeah, it's important to have simplicity and simple projects. So how we've dealt with that is to create samples in the store that are extremely simple. And I get it. I mean, I come home at night, I'm exhausted. If I want to make a very complicated sweater, I have to set time out in my life to do that. I can't just come home and sit on the couch and knit a crazy cabled asymmetrical sweater. So I definitely also relish in kind of I knit a Lori shawl by Carrie Bostick Hoge recently, and it's basically garter stitch that's in an asymmetrical triangle shape, and it was so delightful. So we definitely have a lot of projects that are just extremely simple, cast on, cast off, sew, very easy to sew, easy to fit, not very complex fit-wise for people. And, Melanie and I, we definitely had to work on that aspect with the natural dyer. She was great. She kept saying, you have to be more simple. You have to be more simple. And she's right. There are definitely complex projects in the book, but there's also simple projects in the book. Sometimes I think too simple for people, like my Northwoods hat project. It's knit out of chunky yarn. You dye the yarn. I try to keep both processes as simple as possible, knowing that it's a two-part process, which that in itself is kind of daunting for some. And, people added color work to their hats and, all sorts of things.
I think there's a challenge there sometimes between those two things. And you need to cater to your customer, right? Like your customer is the people who keep you in business. And so you can't just say, well, that's not what I want to do. So, right, exactly. You need to meet them where they are. And I'm sure you also provide more complex or second step kind of projects as well. But yeah, and was there any hesitation as far as the book is concerned of including both yarn projects and sewing projects? Was there any feeling like, oh, well, maybe that's two different customers for a book? And, people might say, well, I can't use half the projects. I can just see some people thinking that. So was there any discussion about that?
Oh, my goodness. So, well, the other thing to add to that is that there's not, if any, natural dyeing books that really hone in on the process of using cellulose-based fibers. So that means cotton and linen. They're more difficult to dye than protein-based fibers, wool and silk. And wool and silk take dye easily. They're very, very vibrant. They're always beautiful. So when you look at most photos in natural dyeing books, they're including only wool and silk, and they're only giving the instructions to dye on wool and silk. And so we first had this thing where I was a little reluctant to include cellulose-based fibers, but we decided to go for it, which I do think was the best choice. And it did helped me grow as a dyer and as a writer and a teacher. So we had that layer. And then, yes, the layer on top of that, which is that there's fabric and there's yarn. And then, of course, we had to have ready-made things because there's people who want to do natural dyeing who don't know how to knit or sew. And one of the amazing things that I came to learn through this process, I always think of natural dyeing as something you would only maybe do if you already knew to knit and sew. Like it's, a process further down the path that you would want to try. And really, we have a lot of people who are coming who this is their first textile practice, which I think is absolutely amazing. But I just had no idea.
Right. So their entry point is through natural dyeing. And that was something that you didn't really necessarily realize in the past, but that writing this book taught you.
Absolutely.
Interesting. And do you feel like you would have been ready to write this book prior? I mean, you knew about natural dyeing after you had sought out a teacher, locally to teach you in English how to do it. But do you feel like those years of owning Verb and working with people one-on-one in a class setting was instructive to you? And if so, like sort of in what way? Like what did they teach you that you ended up being able to pull on when you were writing?
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I feel like every single day and all the hours I stood over a dye pot are priceless in terms of my experience in writing the book. So one of the things is like in my production studio, we don't dye by using teaspoons and tablespoons. We dye using a percentage-based system. And I have tried to teach that in class, like in Dyeing 101 classes, and I see people's eyes just kind of glaze over. And so that was a huge part of the book, was writing it so it was in volume measurements. If you look deep enough, you can use a percentage-based system within my book, but only if you already know that. And so they kind of separated that out. So that was a really important thing to not have as the forefront of my book. And to keep, again, the math and like kind of the chemistry kind of as behind the scenes as possible, though it is there. So having both of them there is very important. But only when you're ready to go there do you have to look at that. And you don't ever even have to look at it. You can enjoy the natural dyeing process.
Yeah, so, that's a great point. And I, as a person who's never done this, I didn't notice them. I mean, I read the book, and I can understand, okay, there is chemistry happening here, but I didn't sort of get bogged down by it.
Good. Oh my God. Yes. I was so anxious writing the book and putting it out there. And I have to say, to see people doing the projects and having them turn out and having people happy, it's just, it's so incredible. I'm so grateful. But yeah, so that definitely influenced, I think my years of having to do reproducibility in my studio because of my production line is very, very important to understanding the process and teaching it, and helping people get results that they like. I had a lot of people come in to my store over the years using different natural dye books and feeling like they couldn't understand maybe what they did to get a certain result, or that the materials they were using were kind of inconclusive. And so I felt like it was really important to include, dyes that have a really strong history with light fastness, with ease of use, with reproducibility.
Explain what light fastness is.
Yeah, light fastness is also referred to as color fastness. So, how fast a color fades. And, it's not bad that a color fades because the chemicals you have to use in order to get something that doesn't fade is pretty intense. But we don't want your color fading for, I don't even know. I mean, I dye with the intention that at least 50 years or 100 years or something, you would have this color coming with you. I don't want it to fall out within 5 years of you making your project.
And that's something when I asked earlier about sort of people's assumptions about natural dyeing, and you said one of them is that it's toxic and the other is that it's not light fast. In other words, people feel like, yeah, you're going to dye that, this brilliant shade of red, but after 3 washes, it'll be back to being sort of, beige again or something like that.
Yes.
And that's not true if you're doing it right.
If you're doing it right, I mean, it's like magical, but there's also science to it, right? So, while it's fun to go and wander into your backyard and take things and try to dye with it, and you might get color from those things, a lot of times those things will fade. And for some people, everyone has different expectations around this, right? Like I can't dye for my line at Verb with anything willy-nilly because the client that's coming to us is used to a certain amount of color fastness in their life. But let's say I'm just doing an art project, or you just want to discover kind of the world around you and you're okay with re-dyeing something, that's fine.
Right, exactly. So it's really about the end use and the end user and how they want it. And one of the things I was most surprised about, that I don't know, maybe other people would be surprised about too, is how hard it is to make green. I feel like, right, your assumption is like everything in nature is green. And so green's got to be like the number one easiest thing to dye with because there's so much to choose from. And yet I'm looking at, you have some pages of swatches that you've made on both the protein-based fibers and the cellulose-based fibers. And they're beautiful and they kind of go through the whole spectrum and there's like no green. And I'm like, where's the green? So tell us why is it so hard to make green and what is the best way to kind of get close to green?
Yeah, so yellow is the most predominant color that one is going to get from nature. That's the easiest color to get. And it also tends to be the most fugitive color. Fugitive means that it fades fastest. And so the yellows I included in the book are yellows that have a good history of connecting with cloth for long periods of time. This thing I refer to as shade cards that are in the book, and I've listed kind of the most commonly found natural dye extracts available. So easy to find on the internet or maybe in your local store, like your local yarn store if you live maybe in New York or the Bay Area. If we look at that, there's pink cochineal and there's madder red, and then you've got this big swath of yellows, and then you end kind of with logwood purple. And if you look at what you're wearing, most of us are not usually wearing yellow. Sometimes we're wearing red or maybe pink, and purple a little more popular, but green is a very popular color to wear. So what I kind of ask the reader to do is dig a little bit deeper and start combining those different colors on the shade card to make even more complex colors, or a simple color like green, but also complex oranges, magentas. There's thousands of colors that we love to wear that are not on the shade card. To make green on wool and silk, you combine a yellow dye with the logwood purple, and you can combine it in different increments and you can get different shades of green. Depending upon the yellow, the undertone of that yellow, again, that will influence the shade of green that you get. The other way to make green is you dye something with indigo, which is a completely kind of different process than all other dyes that are in the book, and it's set apart a little bit for that reason. And then you put that indigo dyed piece of yarn or fabric or your dress or what have you into a dye bath of yellow, and you get this very beautiful emerald green. So 2 completely different styles of greens, the yellow-based purple green versus the kind of indigo yellow emerald green.
Right. And so green is really a combination, always a combination. Yeah, I think that's really neat. And it's just something I hadn't realized until I read this book. So that's really cool. And for Verb, I mean, it sounds as though you do carry textiles that are made by other makers besides your sort of in-house lines.
Yeah.
And so are you going to like TNNA and the trade shows?
No, we don't wholesale our yarn a lot. We do have some stuff that we are able to sell to other shops that you can find. We have sewing patterns that we drafted in-house, and we have natural dyeing kits that go with the book. And then in terms of me going to purchase for the store, I actually don't go. I would go because I love seeing my friends who are designers and who own yarn companies and what have you. But honestly, we do a lot of projects at Verb that we work with farmers and we mill our own yarn from locally sourced wool. And, we have a budget, and I kind of look at the budget and I think, well, I could go to this trade show, which, costs money. We had to fly either in the past to Ohio or, to DC this year. And, or I could take that money and I could create a new line of yarn. Mm-hmm. So in the past, I've chosen to create new lines of California wool yarn. This year, we're going to go to Iceland, and I'm going to go meet a natural dyer in Iceland and do some textile research there. So I think they're extremely valuable, but in my world, Quince and Brooklyn Tweed, which are two of the larger companies we carry, they don't go to TNNA. And we, at some point don't have enough room in the store for more yarn.
You have relationships with the people that you need to buy from.
Yeah.
What is the trip to Iceland? What is the end goal of that?
Good question. Yeah. So, my book is I look at it as the end of about a 10 to 15 year cycle and process of learning. And it was kind of a brain dump, which is amazing and also kind of intense because I've just been working on this for so long. And where do I go from here? So it's been kind of a time of reflection for me about what I enjoyed and what worked over the past 10 to 15 years and kind of what needs, some work and things like that. And so, yeah, I have this desire to essentially document more in depth kind of the umami of natural dyeing. So looking at dyeing with lichens and mushrooms and block printing and rice paste resists in Japan. We do have 2 60-gallon California grown indigo fermentation vats at the store. There's maybe 15 of them in the entire United States. That was a 5-year project we were working on, and I would love to go to Japan and see that in process. It involves composting and fermentation. So yeah, going and kind of documenting those processes and meeting those people behind those processes that have been helping kind of keep them alive. And I don't know where that will ultimately go, but that's kind of my current interest. So Iceland is playing into that.
I think that it's interesting to think about the role that a book can play in that kind of journey because, and I found this for myself too, that you work for a long time in this internally driven way to know everything about certain things. And so it's like this, I don't know, there's some reason why you feel like compelled. It's like a compulsion to do this and like master it and become the person who knows about this. And then a book is a really good place to put that. Like it can be, as you said, a brain dump. It's like it goes into this book and everything goes into this book and then it's your book. And then afterward, sort of once it's out in the world, there's like this sort of restlessness or sense of like, now, like I've put it somewhere, right? I did it. And it's like, what do I do now? And in some ways, I think that's such a good gift because it frees you to be able to do the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't have said it any better.
Yeah, I have definitely found that to be true with myself. And it helps you grow because you were able to sort of let it go. Not that you're going to say goodbye to it, but it's like you can sort of say goodbye to a particular phase and be like, I'm ready now to do the next thing for me, and sometimes that comes with some like bad feelings like, well, I don't know, where you're like, right? Like that bad feeling of like, I don't know, if you're a very internally driven person, which I totally see that you are, and I feel like I am as well, it can feel hard to not have a thing that you're driven toward or to find the new thing.
Yeah. And then again, it comes back to like, okay, so where is the textile community here at? Where is my customer at? And that, I'm just trying to go to like a more obscure place. And I think a lot of them already feel like I kind of exist already in an obscure place. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I hear you. So let's just my last piece about the store. It's just about some of the teachers that you've brought in, and I'd love to hear kind of some of the highlights of this year. Either people who've already come or people who are scheduled to come, so people know what's coming and what who are you bringing in?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most amazing things for me in working at Verb has been this kind of like amazing parade of talent that have come through Verb stores and perspectives, and so grateful for that, and being able to meet these just amazing people. One of the people I'm most excited about, who doesn't live too far, lives about 2 hours from Verb. Her name's Jody Alexander, and she's a book and textile artist, just like an amazing artist, and she's teaching this class called Boro bags. Boro is this Japanese tradition of mending and patching, and you make kind of your own fabric through this patching technique, and then you sew it into a bag. And I think the product, the kind of what you're making is really beautiful, and the process is very beautiful. Let's see here. Katrina Roderbaugh was in town recently. It's another artist who I really admire, and her and I had a slow fashion forum, and Sonia Phillip came and spoke. We all were on a panel together. So Sonia was there, and Alice Wu, who was one of the co-founders of a really amazing fabric and clothing company called Feral Child, and Sasha Dorr, who's an amazing natural dyer who teaches at California College of the Arts. And we just talked about, slow fashion and the different ways that we kind of interacted with it. And that was amazing. And we had a really, really amazing turnout. And I'd love to continue those conversations. And, each of us wears clothing, and each of us is around nature in some way. And so just to hear different people's perspectives and journeys through that is really meaningful to me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I wish I had been able to come. And I had Sonia Phillip on the podcast a while back, way back in the beginning. And she's got a really interesting and worth hearing about journey into making her own clothing and her relationship with her body and representing that body in the world through clothing that she's made for it and for herself. And I think that's she's got a really great story. So that sounds great. And I love that you're bringing people in and kind of bringing conversation. So it's not just teaching, but it's also sort of an education in a different kind of way. Okay, I want to get to your recommendations. Before we do, I did have one question, which is about equipment, which is about your gloves. I feel like one of the things with dyeing fabric is you need good gloves. So will you just tell us briefly what gloves you wear?
Yeah, the Casabella line of gloves are what I have historically worn, because you're taking them on and off all the time, and they're easy to take on and off, and they just fit really well, and they're a little expensive, but I think if your hands are going to be in gloves a lot, they're totally worth it.
Okay. That's a good recommendation. I know it seems simple, but I don't know. I just think that that's a good thing to recommend to people. So you wanted to talk about the work of Wendell Berry about creating a local economy.
Yes. Yeah. I just am totally in awe of Wendell Berry. And he is a author and poet and visionary and farmer who lives in Kentucky. And he's written at least 50 books. And he writes a lot on a local economy and how important that is. And the earth, and being in alignment and in harmony with the earth, and that it's a balance, and really respecting and preserving that balance. And I just find his work really, really powerful.
Is there a particular book or something that you would particularly recommend for people to kind of get started, or because it sounds like he's got a big body of work?
The book that I am very connected with at the moment are a series of his essays, and it's in what I think his newest book. It came out in 2015, and it's called Our Only World.
Excellent. And you also wanted to recommend a sewing pattern by Elizabeth Duvivier, also past guest on the While She Naps podcast. And she runs Squam, the Squam Art Workshops, and she has a really neat sewing pattern out, the Squam Smock. So have you tried this pattern out yet, or?
Yes. And so it's actually called, I wrote Squam Smock on your note. I'm sorry. It's actually called the Westwater Tunic. I always call it the Squam Smock.
Well, it looks like, I know exactly what it looks like. And so when I saw that written, I was like, yep, that's what it is. But I didn't even look to make sure. It's called the, okay. It's called the Westwater Tunic. Okay.
I just always, when I look at it, I think, yes, that makes so much sense. You're making things at Squam, and you would make this smock, and it's called the Squam Smock.
Yeah, well, now we've renamed it, whether Elizabeth likes it or not. So she probably doesn't, but there you go.
And so, yeah, the real name of it is the Westwater Tunic, and yeah, I'm teaching at Squam in June, and
congratulations! Is that your first time going, or have you been?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm so excited. And so when Elizabeth and I were discussing my classes, she told me how she started this new project where she's working with this woman, also a Squam attendee named Sam Lamb, and that they had been working on a sewing pattern. And of course, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it and to sew one of my own. And I had recently purchased a new sewing machine, and I thought this is a very kind of simple, straightforward pattern to get to know my new sewing machine. So it's been a wonderful time just making this pattern, and I blogged about it recently, so there's notes on that. But it's a lovely.
Are you going to be incorporating that pattern into your teaching at all, or that's just separate?
It's separate, but I have this idea that I thought would be fun where maybe I would put the call out. I don't know. I could see it in a lot of different ways, whether it's asking people to make a smock and to wear it to my dyeing classes to protect their clothing, because that would be a good idea anyway. Or maybe that they could cut out pieces for a Squam smock and they could come and like dye it in an indigo vat during class or something like that. But I definitely could see a tie-in, not from a point of view, but from like a dyeing point of view.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I love to wear like a smock kind of dress like that over jeans. Like I just feel like that's my most comfortable uniform. Like if I'm wearing that, I'm like, I'm happy. Like I feel creative. I feel like good. I'd like to wear it like a dress over jeans. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
And who doesn't always need another set of pockets? You know?
Yes, I definitely do. And even if it's just to put my phone so I can listen to podcasts while I'm working, there's nothing worse than like wearing leggings and being like, God, there's nowhere to stick your phone. So yes, you need a Squam smock. Okay, this is great. Well, Kristine, where can people reach out to you if they would like to send you a message? Like, where's the best place for them to find you online?
Okay. My email, of course, info@averbforkeepingwarm.com. Is a great way to get in touch. I'm also on Instagram, and I'm constantly kind of posting photos of the dyeing process and what we're working on in the dye studio. It's our acronym is AVFKW for A Verb for Keeping Warm. And yeah, those are probably the two main places if you want to get in touch.
Super. That's super. So people can feel free to reach out if they have something that they want to talk with you about. And that's wonderful. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on the While She Naps podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you for having me, Abby.
You've been listening to the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg, and you can visit my blog, whileshenaps.com, where you can sign up for my email and newsletter to get the best in sewing, blogging, and small business delivered right to your inbox. And thank you to Textilia for sponsoring today's episode. Textilia is the online sewing community you've been waiting for, built for all types of sewists, including garment makers, quilters, and textile artists, as well as business owners. Plan and document your projects, log your stash, search the community-managed database of patterns and fabrics, and connect with other members and businesses, all in one easy-to-use website. Join today at textilia.com. And if you enjoyed the show, tell a friend about it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.